Hello and welcome to Study Forum. Today we are studying one of the very famous critical theory in English literature by a very famous philosopher, Tzvetan Todorov. Tzvetan Todorov is a Franco-Bulgarian philosopher. Todorov has published a total 21 books. Today we are studying one of that very important concept in literary and critical theory, that is the typology of detective fiction. Detective fiction has played and is continues to play a complex and a curious role in relation to field of literature. On the one hand, detective fiction, like other genre fiction, is seen as a popular and lesser subset of high or proper literature. On the other hand, the literature of detection, with its complex and double narrative, in which an absence of story, that is, of a crime, is gradually reconstructed in the second story, which is the investigation. It uses suspense and its power to give aesthetic shape to the most brute of matter and has been seen as a paradigmatic of literary narrative itself. Tzvetan Todorov's The Typology of Detective Fiction, which remains one of the most significant contributions to the field, sought to uphold the distinction between genre fiction and literature as a question of structure rather than of value. However, his identification of the two orders of story, inquest and crime, as equivalents to Russian formalist, which he called as discourse and story. Another approach of reading detective fiction is to examine its structure. In The Poetics of Prose in 1971, Tzvetan Todorov wrote what he calls the typology of detective fiction, in which he divided it into three types: the whodunit, the thriller, and the suspense. Todorov further claims that within these three types there are essential two stories. Moreover, and most of the time, it consists of two main stories. In the whodunit, the fourth story is that of the murder, which is completed at the beginning or before the story begins. The second story before the second story begins. The second story is the investigation, that this takes up the great part of the novel or the story, while the reader may know who committed the crime. The focus is on the detective's ability to uncover the murder. Okay, now in the thriller, the murder or the first story is suppressed, and the novel focuses on the second story, which is the investigation. The crime does not come before the action, but it connects with each other. This narrative form looks forward rather than back. But unlike the whodunit, the detective may face danger as she unravels the clues. In the suspense type, the first story of the murder and the second story of the investigations are maintained. But in the second story, the detective is also vulnerable to danger and may even be suspect. What makes this story suspenseful is a delay or a roadblock in the way of solutions. There may also be an ambiguity between the detective and the criminals. Modern detective stories are often a combination of all three types, with numerous and interweaving stories. But Todorov's theory allows for a useful approach of reading contemporary detective fiction and mystery writing. In this essay, The Typology of Detective Fiction 1966, Tzvetan Todorov articulated a critical method for rethinking the detective story as a serious fictional genre. The first story, The Whodunit, revolved around two murders, the story of the crime and the story of the investigation. Like the Russian formalist terms the fable, the story, and the subject, the plot. Finally, a third type of detective fiction surfaces as it blends the properties of the whodunit and the thriller, confusing on the criminal as its central conscious. In the suspense novels, readers is interested not only by what has happened, but also by what will happen next. He wonders about the future as about the past. Okay, so this was a very short summary of this critical theory, The Typology of Detective Fiction by Tzvetan Todorov. Thank you.